It did. It did happen, just not on October 7. That happened in 1982 in Lebanon, in a Palestinian refugee camp. That literally did happen. So cute, my little Hasanito. Journalists at CNN and BBC exposed the inner workings of their newsrooms. So a couple journalists actually came out and spoke out against the standards and practices that their own news teams have violated at the behest of Israel in their coverage. Okay? And it is, in my opinion, really good journalism. We're going to be watching this. And I believe there's some terms of service violation moments in it. I will try to avoid them to the best of my ability. But let's watch.
This is a moment in history that we don't often see, where we actually see genocide being perpetrated as it's happening. And in a situation where Western governments like the United States, the UK, and others have been complicit, and you've got Western media that have actually become a part of the mechanism of genocide. That's what's different. That's what's frightening.
When political leaders speak of genocide, they repeat a time-worn mantra, never again. Over the past year, for the Palestinians of Gaza, again has become reality. A genocide broadcast almost in real time by its victims. This is a film about an alternative version of that reality, one told by major Western news organizations, how they have provided cover for an historic crime and have seen their inner workings exposed like never before. We have spoken with more than a dozen journalists who have been covering the Gaza genocide for the Western world's leading agenda-setting outlets, including the BBC in the UK and CNN in the US. Both describe a repeated failure to report the truth on this.
They got whistleblowers basically to come out and be like, yeah, our newsrooms are shit. And I know that they are, because I also talk to fucking journalists in these newsrooms on a regular basis. I talk to producers in these newsrooms on a regular basis. Just so you understand, like, when I tell you that these newsrooms are obviously biased, it's not just me examining the fucking direct footage on the ground and the way that they contextualize and frame that violence and how it is actually permissible, it is actually appropriate, it is necessary. It's not just about that. It's also my direct relationship with a lot of people who also engage in journalism.
Story.
Prior to October 7th, I hand on heart believed that CNN went to great lengths to report the truth, and exclusively the truth. But after October 7th, the ease with which I saw news lines that supported the Israeli narrative come out really shook me. There were times where CNN was...
Who was coordinating the cover-up? It's not like... It's not necessarily that coordinated. It's just that... Noam Chomsky has talked about this so much. It's his fucking most formative work, in my opinion. But it's basically the institutions that elevate people who don't speak on certain issues, who have this bias built in. Okay? There is no reason to be like, oh, don't you dare say something about Israel or else you'll get fired. It's not like that. Okay? It's more so people who do genuinely have these opinions, who do genuinely think that Israel is fucking awesome and all their enemies are violent barbarians and yada yada, that get elevated to these positions inevitably. Because it is the most important goal of American media, Western press in general. It is to align with the American State Department. Any matter of real reporting that they do that seems unceremonious, seems weird, okay, in comparison to, what is this? 1135 is TOS 2? Okay. Fine. Thank you. when they do legitimate reporting and you're like, damn, why are they doing legitimate reporting? This is crazy. This is unique. This is weird. It's because they want to maintain a veneer of objective reporting so they can more successfully conduct propaganda that is aligned with the State Department interests.
Is happy to push hard, but on balance, it's very clear where we lie, regrettably, and it's not entirely with the truth.
Gaza has massively exposed the hypocrisies at the heart of the BBC. The fact that it very much does respond to influence, it very much can be swayed. It does follow the government line broadly on certain stories. The BBC is meant to be a public service. It's meant to be for the people. But at the end of the day, its purse strings are held by the government. And that you can see in the coverage.
The October 7th attack by Hamas, in which more than 1,100 Israelis were killed, almost 800 of them civilians, was the deadliest day in Israel's history. As they launched their retaliation, Israeli officials made clear this was not just a war on Hamas. Everyone in Gaza would be fair game.
I want to mention something here. He's going to say the famous line, we're fighting human beasts. We have to cut their food, electricity, and water off. I also want to mention something here, but like, this was also very frustrating for me to watch the Daily this morning. I was listening to the New York Times Daily. And of course, they did the both sides. Like, let's hear from an Israeli that lives in the kibbutz. I think it was like Kibbutz Be'eri, and what his assessment is 1 year out from October 7. And then let's hear from a Palestinian who's in Gaza. And like, no matter how much you try to both sides the situation, it's pretty obvious one side is like significantly more damaged in the process over the course of 12 months of genocide. Okay. Like, you can still see, no matter how much you try to make it seem like, you know, oh, well, both sides are suffering to a certain degree. Like, you kind of tell what the fuck's going on. One guy barely has the capacity to speak to the New York Times journalist because he has to go and find an eSIM and hope that like there is enough you know, there's enough bars that day that he can like actually fucking speak. He had to, he's literally been displaced 5 separate times at this point. His house was destroyed, you know. The other side, the kibbutznik went to a Red Sea hotel, went back to normal life, still very frustrated, but very openly talking about like how after October 7, I don't think any Palestinian is like, I think all Palestinians are complicit and I will never forgive them for making me hate them. Like, that's what he was saying. Like, so incredibly violent. Like, you have to be really primed. You have to be perfectly primed to his position to listen to him speak and go, what the fuck? To not go, what the fuck is this guy saying? Okay. It's crazy. And I know for a fucking fact that there are way more peaceful kibbutzniks out there, okay? There are people from Kibbutz Be'eri that on October 8 were speaking clearly on the humanity of Palestinians. For the record, this guy, not one of them, all right? So the New York Times went out of their fucking way to find a guy who was at the heart of it and is like super fucking... You know, they could have very easily shown a different perspective from someone who is an Israeli citizen living in the fucking kibbutz that was like, this is on the Israeli government. There are plenty more Israeli citizens that are not even living in the fucking kibbutz that have been protesting in the streets against the Netanyahu administration, against the fact that Netanyahu is not interested in dealing with the Palestinians in any way but bloody warfare, in any way but genocide. But New York Times did not choose to show that perspective. That is deliberate, okay? That is a deliberate way to frame the issue, to say these guys are all peaceful guys. They were helping the Palestinians at the border. And look at their perspective now, because October 7 changed them. They changed them dramatically. Okay? To me, I think that unironically does a bad job at presenting the diversity within the Israeli public completely. Okay? The diversity of opinion even amongst the Israeli public. Yeah, I saw that message. That was really funny. I got to read it. Hold on. I know you guys banned him immediately, but he said, "Suck my cock, you fanboy fat ass," or something. What the fuck was it? Fuck you, Hasan. Suck my pee-pee, you loser. You like femboy, fat, furry, inflation porn? What the fuck is inflation porn? Femboy, fat, furry, inflation porn? Dude, that's a self-report, if anything, dog. If you know, I don't even know what the fuck that is, dog. I don't even know what the fuck that is. Google it in show chat. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. All right, let's continue.
טילים, מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible.
But, as with any genocide, the first step was to dehumanize the enemy.
Blood-thirsty terrorists who rape and burn people alive, and it's been reported on the BBC.
What happened on October 7th included acts that were bad enough in and of themselves.
Yes.
But if you want to create a context for dehumanization and genocide, you need to go further.
The Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman just confirmed babies and toddlers were found.
Stop the cap. Stop the cap right now. Stop the cap.
Like I said this already, like there were plenty of atrocities on October 7. 800 civilians were killed. Some were killed by the Israeli military, but the majority, the overwhelming majority, were killed by Palestinian resistance fighters. Okay? That's enough. You can just literally point to the things that happened. But that wasn't enough because Israel knew exactly what Israel was going to do. And in order to be able to achieve that goal of conducting bloody warfare, conducting a genocidal campaign, unlike the previous sieges that you can also say had that same genocidal intent ultimately, but didn't go as far as the post-October 7 genocide, okay? They had to fucking take it one step further. That's it. They had to say they're doing mass rapes, they're barbarians that are interested, they're only there to do anti-Semitism, they're only invested in this from an anti-Semitic perspective. It is, God forbid you think about this as like people escaping a concentration camp. Do not think about it like that. That in and of itself is also anti-Semitic.
With their heads decapitated.
We saw false reports about beheaded babies, which never happened.
And then people tried to yell at me for saying, I don't agree with this. I don't believe this. I don't think there's any verifiable evidence for this. I tried to do my very best in my coverage. And I have maintained that principle since then. I did not jump to conclusions when immediately people were saying on the other side, people, and by the way, they were correct at the end of the day when they were like, oh, the Israeli military killed a bunch of Jewish Israelis themselves. I was familiar with the Hannibal doctrine, but I did not, until there was conclusive evidence, I did not dive into that side either. Okay, I said, we're going to wait and see. Same thing with this. It didn't make sense as to why Hamas would like behead babies or whatever. Okay, or engage in like a kidnapping operation where they also took a side trip, a side quest to do like mass rapes or whatever. Obviously, that also did not make sense. Is this propaganda? This was completely made up. That was completely made up. 0 punishments for those who made this up, by the way, and 0 punishments were incurred for repeating it, including but not limited to the motherfucking president of the United States of America, who obviously has a fucking brain tumor, okay? He straight up said it. And it became a news story that it wasn't real, and the president said it, but it went nowhere. It didn't matter. Why? Because it was aligned with American interests. Understand something. Maybe years later, we make a final assessment of the situation and we go, oh, wow, that was really fucked up. Like the WMD lie that allowed us to go into Iraq. Wow, that was really fucked up. What punishments came of that? What happened? There is no deterrence whatsoever for lying like this.
About a systematic campaign of mass rape, which never happened. About babies being cut from the abdomen of their mothers, which never happened.
It did. It did happen, just not on October 7. That is one of the grossest versions of Hasbara lies. That is a documented atrocity that occurred in Sabra and Shatila. That happened in 1982 in Lebanon, in a Palestinian refugee camp. That literally did happen. It was conducted by phalangist Christo-fascists against Palestinian refugees and Lebanese Shia populations that lived in the Sabra and Shatila camp. And not only did it happen, but also the IDF facilitated that extermination campaign. So that did happen, just not to Israelis on October 7. Which is crazy.
And a whole series of other horrific atrocities. These were deliberately concocted official stories that were being provided in particular.
This is a complete failure of the main responsibility of news media. It was a complete and utter historic fucking failure. Okay? It is crazy. It is crazy that they just like not only got away with this, but no punishments came from just repeating this lie, and people still repeat it to this day. They still repeat it to this fucking day. Yeah. We joke about, as a chatter correctly pointed out, we joke about like another horrifying blood libel that Trump engages in, where he's like, Haitians are eating cats and dogs. We were like, oh, that's crazy. We don't even treat that with the seriousness that it deserves, but that's besides the point. We understand that it's fake and we laugh about it. But when we're doing this at the behest of Israel, when all of these democratic institutions, liberal institutions, are fucking reiterating these falsehoods in an effort to, give just cause to Israel to engage in its fucking bloody campaign against the Palestinian population and all Arabs in the region, doesn't matter. That's real. You got to take it as real.
To a Western audience.
Down to the baby in the oven, by the way. A child was tossed into an oven in 1947 or 1948, whenever Deir Yassin happened. That is a real atrocity that Israel, before Israel existed, committed against the Palestinian population in the village of Deir Yassin. That is a documented atrocity from the Nakba. When they went into the Deir Yassin village and they made a baker, they tried to force a baker to throw his child into the oven. And when he refused to do so, they threw the child into the oven while he watched, and then they threw him in afterwards. Once again, another April 9th, 1948. Thank you, Time Without an OWO. Another real documented atrocity that the Zionist militias engaged in before Israel existed.
In order to create an atmosphere in which the crimes that were to follow would go on unchecked.
Shortly after October 7th, Israel sealed off Gaza's borders, including to foreign reporters. The Palestinian journalists left to tell the story would soon be killed at an unprecedented rate. Israeli forces quickly set their sights on Gaza's healthcare system. One by one, hospitals, swelling with patients and refugees, came under attack.
The difference between this genocide and the other wars that I had been in.
HasanAbi, reconstructive surgeon who also survived the genocide, who was barred entry from the nation state of Germany because he was supposed to attend a pro-Palestinian conference where he was going to speak to the atrocities that he watched unfold in front of his eyes. They barred him. They detained him at the airport and they sent him back to, I believe, England. Straight Nazi shit, okay? Remember that. Straight up fucking Nazi shit. Good job, Germany.
The wars in Gaza, the 2021 war, the 2014 war, the 2012, 2009, and even the war in Yemen, the war in Syria. The comparison between them and a genocide is the comparison between a flood and a tsunami. In Gaza, 50% of the wounded were children, and they remain so. The massacres never stop, the operating rooms never stop, and even when you're doing that, you then discover that you've only treated a small percentage of the wounded.
Israel wanted to begin a campaign to start taking out all of these medical facilities. In part, they were concerned that Hamas combatants were going to be treated in them, but also this was part of a war of annihilation to try to force the Palestinians in Gaza into a constant state of motion, moving.
Remember Al Ahli? Not Al Shiva, Al Ahli? And how much that became a conversation point for defenders of Israel to say, oh, dude, everyone is lying. It was actually Palestinian Islamic Jihad that blew up its own hospital. God forbid, Israel would never do such a thing. And then what happened? Israel blew up every fucking hospital in the Strip. Israel occupied many of the hospitals, including the only cancer ward in the entire fucking Strip itself. With military occupation, they still use it as a base of operations. What happened? What happened?
Moving from one place to another. Nowhere is safe for you, not even a hospital.
A home, a school, a hospital that hosts terrorists is not a home, is not a school, and is not a hospital. It's a terror base.
The Israelis were pumping the public with information that was meant to convince people that hospitals are not really hospitals.
Hamas was using the patients in that hospital as a human shield.
And this was a narrative that we saw unfolding.
It's bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit, by the way. Complete and utter bullshit that is that serve the interests of maintaining a genocide, continuing a genocide. How insane. How incredible.
Almost from the beginning.
By November 10th, just over 1 month into Israel's assault, half of all hospitals in Gaza were out of service. One of them was the Rantisi Children's Hospital, which Israel bombed and then raided after it claimed Hamas was using it to hide Israeli captives. Once inside, military spokesperson Daniel Hagari said Israeli forces had found proof and gave CNN special access.
Evidence, Hagari says, points towards Hamas and possible hostage.
The craziest part about this was that it was such bad propaganda. It was such bad propaganda that required, like, that you could have made better if you had one fucking Arab speaker, okay, that looked through it and was like, hey, don't point to this fucking calendar to say it's a terrorism calendar. Okay? That's it. Like, you needed one. And there are plenty of Israeli Jews who speak Arabic. Like, there are plenty of Arab Jews in Israel. You know what I mean? There's even Druze and Palestinian citizens of Israel that participate in the IDF. You could have just had one fucking guy be like, hey, dude, don't point to the fucking calendar and be like, this is a terrorism calendar. But they don't give a shit.
church presence below the hospital.
Hagari showed CNN's reporter, Nick Robertson, a document on the wall, which he claimed was a roster of Hamas members keeping guard over Israeli captives.
This is a guarding list. Every terrorist has his own shift.
This became quite an embarrassing moment for CNN because it wasn't a Hamas roster at all. It was a calendar and written in Arabic.
Yeah, I don't think it was that embarrassing for them. I think that they just like, it's embarrassing from our perspective, right? Because like we know that it was bullshit, but many people just continued going along with it. They didn't give a shit. That didn't stop CNN, in my opinion, from changing the trajectory of their coverage, from being a little bit more serious. They didn't do it at all. Oh. Anyway, I'm gonna run the 3-minute ad break again. Here it is. If you no longer want to see those ads, well, you can subscribe. My favorite rhetoric against the hospital, schools equals Hamas compounds using civilians as human shields argument is that the Israelis are the ones who send the bombs with this knowledge. They are more immediately guilty ones. Yes. What? CBS has invited self-described mental health expert, DEI strategist and trauma trainer, Dr. Donald Grant, to moderate a conversation on this issue. Oh, it's because, wait. CBS has been roiling after a CBS Mornings interview in which anchor Tony DeCoppel pressed Ta-Nehisi Coates over his pro-Palestinian framing of Israel-Palestine conflict, but the interview was celebrated by many, tense and substantive per WAPO, but angered some at CBS who felt DeCoppel brought his own bias. I thought that they were doing the trauma counseling because I think the guy who self-immolated was a CBS, like he was a part of the CBS news team. The guy who tried to self-immolate was a part of the CBS news team. But maybe not. But we'll cover that in a second. We'll get to that.
Arabic was the days of the week. But the report that came out from Nick Robertson just swallowed up Israel's claim.
It happened a couple days ago.
Worse, the allegation that the calendar was a Hamas roster had already been debunked on social media the day before the CNN broadcast. According to multiple CNN journalists and an internal WhatsApp log that we obtained, a Palestinian producer alerted her colleagues, including Robertson, but was ignored. The report went out, first on television, but there was still time to correct it before it went up online. Another producer tried to make that case.
Why did they go along with it, I wonder, despite knowing full well at that point, at that fucking point that it, you know, it wasn't correct. I wonder what, you know, what led them.
One colleague saw the report.
God, your media sucks. It's so bad, dude. It's so bad. It's crazy to think that I rely more on Zionist newspapers in Israel for adequate on-the-ground real-time reporting than I do with like the New York Times. And I'm not even talking about like Local Call or Plus 972 magazine or even Haaretz. I'm talking like Ynet has better coverage of what the fuck is going on in Israel and in Gaza than fucking New York Times does. It's crazy. It is crazy. It is so fucking embarrassing. And I think it's partially because, and I've talked about this quite a bit, because like media criticism is like a big part of what I do. It's because Ynet or all of these other papers don't actually have to do the propaganda to an audience that has been served it for years and years and years. So they already have this opinion in mind so they can be like more honest in their coverage. Whereas like the New York Times is weighing the Western reception to these actions more. Like, that's probably what it is. That's what it is, because like Western newspapers also have to weigh Israel's like horrifying actions with its reception in the Western world to the uninitiated who aren't as primed as like the broader Israeli society is.
And flagged to Nick, hold on, people are saying that this is not accurate. And apparently Nick said, are you meaning to say that Hagari is lying to us? So there was a chance for this to get...
I know for a motherfucking fact CNN producers know that the Israeli, that the IDF is unreliable. Okay? I know for a fact. I know from former producers that literally know. American news teams know that Israeli spokespeople are the least reliable, most consistently lying people that they have on board. 1,000%. CNN knows it. I can tell you with certainty. Okay? They know. They just don't give a shit. Okay? No, I have the timestamp still open. Don't worry. It's on the other. It's on my other monitor.
Get stopped, but Nick was adamant and it went out. He's a very experienced correspondent. If you are trusting the Israeli government over your own colleagues, then you need to have your wrist slapped at the very least, because your reporting has given cover to the Israeli operation.
No proof would ever emerge of captives held at the Rantisi hospital. Meanwhile, Israeli forces had turned their attention to the Shifa hospital, the largest in the Gaza Strip, responsible for 40% of its healthcare capacity. They began by releasing an animated video of a tunnel network beneath the hospital, which they described as Hamas's command and control center.
The White House and Pentagon today confirmed my reporting yesterday that the U.S. has intelligence suggesting...
This was so crazy, bro. Jake Tapper had a byline on CNN before the Al-Shifa attack where he was like, my sources literally fucking gave me evidence that Israel was going to attack Al-Shifa, and here's the just cause for it before they attacked Al-Shifa. CNN went along with that reporting. That was original reporting. That's not Jake Tapper doing commentary. That's Jake Tapper doing original reporting, which is unique, okay? CNN literally said, we haven't verified any of the reporting, and still wrote it and still saw it fit the print. How crazy. How insane that CNN chose to print original reporting that was completely unverified and unsubstantiated. So much so that they literally still they put that in the article, the top of the article. There was like an editorial note. We have not been able to verify any of these claims. It's like, why are you writing it then? Why are you seeing that it is fit the print? Like, that's ridiculous. For Jake Tapper, I don't necessarily think Jake Tapper is the rugged ultra-Zionist. I think for Jake Tapper, it's a little different. I think he is ambitious and motivated by the pure hatred that he feels for Muslims. I've covered Jake Tapper for quite some time, okay? He is just a massive Islamophobe, okay? He is obviously ambitious. He's a careerist. He knows exactly what to say to maintain his status in American media. And beyond like the Zionist social conditioning that I'm sure he went through and his genuine belief that Israel is doing great, I think the major motivation for him is his Islamophobia, which he does not even fucking hide. He doesn't need to hide it, because in American news, you can be as Islamophobic as you want. Overtly, okay? That's it.
Hamas is operating a command center under the Al-Shifa hospital.
As Israeli forces closed in on the hospital, those claims were repeated, often with little to no pushback on Western news outlets.
And did the IDF show you anything that resembled an actual command and control center?
What we saw, Kana, was a pretty sophisticated-looking tunnel.
The New York Times and other news organizations began to then create their own renditions of.
Remember when they didn't have anything to show for it, by the way? The only thing that they could show for it was like literal fucking tunnel systems under the hospital that were not in use, that they own by their own admission was not in use, that they had actually sealed off those tunnels months prior. How crazy. No, there weren't even any weapons in the fucking tunnels, dog. They brought weapons, small arms, and claimed that it was inside of the fucking MRI room.
What they, I guess, imagined Hamas had underneath Al-Shifa Hospital, promoting the narrative that something very nefarious is taking place. That was the moment, and you can trace it, that the floodgates were opened for the Israelis, that they perceived that they now had
a live ammunition next to a huge electromagnet. Good one.
Green light to wage war against Palestinian hospitals and medical facilities in Gaza.
Do you have what you need to treat people?
So we've run out of burns dressings, and there are over 100 patients with burns covering over 40% of their bodies.
One of probably the most distressing aspects about that period when I was working at Shifa Hospital is that we were getting hundreds and hundreds of wounded. The bombing around Shifa was continuous. And so you'd get phone calls, and all the Western journalists wanted to ask about was, when you walk around, do you see any tunnels?
Israel continues to maintain.
I remember, that was insane. Doctors who are treating children, doctors who are directly treating children's like bullet wounds and you know, taking out fucking bomb shrapnel out of their skulls, were consistently being interrogated in the Western press as though they were, you know, also Hamas, that everyone is Hamas. These are Hamas doctors who were hiding the secret of the Hamas tunnels under the fucking hospitals, dude. If you directly read Hebrew media as a foreign reader, you lose your mind. On the one hand, our headlines and info organization are often way more unhinged than Western news, but Hebrew media also includes stories which don't reach international media, whereas an Israeli reader, you'd be preconditioned to place them in the correct framework. Like, imagine if a kid gets shot for throwing stones at a soldier. As an Israeli, that's okay because stone throwing equals terrorism. For anyone else, though, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Like, Hebrew media gets to fucking adequately report, like accurately report whatever the fuck's going on because it's, you know, facing an audience that is already primed into believing that these people are monstrous barbarians that deserve it no matter how young they are. But Western news can't cover it in that same vein, because if they were to cover Israel and Israel's actions with the accuracy that they would cover anything else, or with the accuracy of a foreign adversary's violent actions against an ally, for example, you would literally lose your fucking mind. You'd be like, this is insane. This is the most insane country on the fucking planet. Why in the ever-loving fuck are we giving unlimited weapons to this fucking nation of psychopaths, dude? What the fuck? A lot more people would feel as you do if American news covered this stuff with the same accuracy that they cover like Russian actions, okay?
Beneath it in underground tunnels, Hamas has a command center. Is this something that you're aware of?
So, I mean, first of all...
And if you say that I've never seen any of the tunnels, then you are dismissed immediately.
After 2 weeks of bombing the Shifa compound, Israeli forces stormed the hospital on November 15th.
The target of the war is to defeat Hamas.
Once again, Daniel Hagari was there.
not giving Israelis a pass here, but like we have Americans that think shoplifting is also something that should be punished by death. So it's not like exclusively an Israeli thing. No, we have our own very violent attitude towards crime and punishment as well. You're absolutely correct on that. Actually, Israel and America are like this when it comes to fucking the draconian attitude that they display towards especially black and brown people that commit any kind of infraction. However, Americans still look at Israel by and large, unless they're like super fucking primed with social conditioning that maintains this idea that like Israel is this moral country, this democracy, this non-apartheid regime. Most Americans look at it as a foreign nation. They don't really fucking fully understand it. So when they have that that question, okay, when they have that like missing puzzle piece in their brain where they're like, I understand, okay, Israel is an ally, I guess, okay, but I see them doing like a bunch of violent shit. Why is America still giving them like unlimited weapons? Why haven't they stopped it? Why hasn't America, the most powerful nation on the planet, stopped it? Like stopped this atrocity? I don't want to even think about this anymore. You have two ways that you can go in that. One is my way, which is this is a direct consequence of America basically fucking dying as an empire, but wants to maintain whatever the fuck kind of allegiances, like hard-fought allegiances they have in the region. Israel is very valuable from that perspective, so they can fucking pack that shit up, give Israel as much territory as possible in its last-ditch effort, and then move on to the real enemy here, China. Or the other side of the story, which is a much easier one to fucking identify with, is that Jews control the fucking media, okay? And a lot of Americans are not making that assessment. They're not making a materialist analysis on the situation. They're not looking at like broader global events and recognizing why America is making the mistake of like continuing Israel's bloody conquest, even if their genuine ambition is just basically business as usual foreign policy. They're going in the other direction. They already have a lot of fucking underlying anti-Semitic attitudes that they kind of just like never really consider. They brush aside, right? Where it's like, yeah, maybe Jews are good money people, or maybe Jews are very powerful and in media and all this shit. Like a lot of Americans do have this sentiment. They don't really like lean into it or think about it. But when you have that underlying sentiment right there, it's a super easy fucking switch to just go full tilt anti-Semitic conspiracy. It's super simple, especially when you have what is presented as the Jewish state and being incredibly violent, and everyone who's defending this state's violent actions as like as a defense of Judaism. How the fuck are people supposed to think about this clearly? We are priming an entire nation, the entire Western, everyone in the Western Hemisphere to be anti-Semitic. Okay?
To show the world some weapons he claimed belonged to Hamas.
How is the U.S. dying? Don't flame. I just want to understand your perspective. If you, I mean, where do I begin? America has spread its imperial ambitions so far and so vast that they have spread themselves too thin. Okay? They couldn't even mount enough of a defense against Russia invading Ukraine. That is a failure on one front. They can't maintain permanent occupation in the Middle East. Like, it's like our military is very strong still. It's significantly more powerful than most other countries. I mean, by a wide margin. But we are spread far too thin. You also have another country out there that is engaging in a shit ton of soft power initiatives that are otherwise very successful. I'm talking about China, of course. China is basically, even Russia, to a certain degree, is basically taking advantage of like American violence and the way that that violence has been experienced in the global South, in the third world, by being like, no, we're fighting against American imperialism here. Okay. By you know, exercising their territorial ambitions in Ukraine. That is the reason why so many people in the global South are fucking pro-Russia. You might be shocked to find that out, because they see it as like, well, those guys are fighting the people that have fucked us over for years and years and years. That's like genuinely how people view it. It's not correct, by the way. I'm just letting you know. I don't believe that. I don't agree with that. But that is the way many people examine the situation. It's the BRICS narrative as well.
Beside some tunnels, many of which were built by Israel in the 1980s. Nothing that remotely resembled a command center. Since the raids on Shifa and Rantisi, every hospital in Gaza has been attacked, put out of service, or demolished. Witnesses have described mass executions, including of patients and medical staff, testimonies that barely register in the Western news cycle.
The hardest, most terrifying thing I saw was when they were executing people right in front of us. They dig a hole, throw 5 or 6 people in it, then bury them. Yeah, and we saw the burials, the aftermath of them at least. More importantly, we cannot secure trade relationship with developing nations. We cannot provide enough enticing loans that allow us to take control over vital extraction industries that moves global capital away from America towards China. Yes. And while China is still operating on the dollar when they're engaging in this, it doesn't matter, because there's a tremendous amount of soft power that they get out of this equation. And America cannot maintain its global empire. America cannot maintain its global empire without the UN, without these international organs of justice, without like the international rule-based order. I have repeated something that I find very scary if you are invested in the continuation of American empire, that I don't think people understand. 800 military bases around the world right now is viewed as a global security partnership. But if soft power capabilities diminish as a direct consequence of America's like bloody war in the entire region, as they already have for the past 20 fucking years, with the invasion of Afghanistan, with the invasion of Iraq, and many other things that America has done, okay, all of a sudden, that's 800 military bases that are invading every fucking country on the planet. You do not want your security partners to start developing resentment towards you. Even if the governments themselves, like the fleet of planes and whatnot that they get, and the sweet little toys that they are able to purchase as a direct consequence of the security partnership, even if they like it, the population is going to have a different perspective on it. And all of a sudden, when the population has a very different perspective on it, governance changes. What do? You do not have enough money and enough, you do not have enough control over these different countries to be able to quell and squash any sort of real popular sentiment and popular resentment against America that these countries will have, especially if they start recognizing that their government is aligned with the United States of America and American imperialism, but not necessarily aligned with their interests. This is a very delicate situation in the Middle East, especially so, right? It is incredibly delicate. Why is it incredibly delicate? Because the populations of these Gulf states absolutely find Israel to be a parasitic force in the region, a violent force in the region for understandable reasons. The governments, on the other hand, or the kingdoms, on the other hand, like the security contracts that they get, like the toys that they get, like the trade that they can do with Israel, like the good favors that they get in the Western world. They have an ultimately very different way of interpreting this relationship. There is a very delicate balance for a lot of these countries. They have to basically stop popular resistance to the best of their ability by saying, oh no, Israel is the big bad, you're right, while simultaneously still continuing to have normal trade relations with Israel, which they have maintained for many, many decades at this point, just not on paper. That's why the Abraham Accords was so significant. Okay? That's why you see people like Erdogan, a NATO nation with the second largest NATO military, have a very different attitude towards Israel. He chirps quite a bit about Israel. He has historically, but he's also known where his bread is buttered. He still ends up, delivering energy to Israel, for example, through Turkish pipelines that go from Azerbaijan through Turkey to Israel, right? That analysis does not change. That he can chirp a lot, right? But ultimately, he knows what to do. You're gonna get banned, ha ha ha. What? Why? What? Are you okay? Let's raid France. You okay, man? Bro was in here for r/plays, but he's been gone for quite some time. Anyway, let's continue.
Mass graves were found with hundreds of bodies.
Over 800 health workers, doctors, nurses, paramedics who've been killed. That kind of dismantlement of health was a critical component of the genocidal machine, because what that did is it ensured that anybody who's wounded die of their wounds, and that anyone with a chronic disease would eventually die of that disease.
I know you can't see the vid because there's TOS in it right now, so I'm hiding the video.
The famine, and so the wounded are now dying because they are malnourished.
This, they say, is a Hamas tunnel that connects to a tunnel network underneath the Al-Shifa hospital.
The Western media was critical to the process of demonization of the Palestinian health system. And what is shocking is that when the Israelis went into Shifa and there were no real evidence of these bunkers, these media outlets did not recant their original stories.
Jody Rudoran spent 2 decades as a reporter and an editor for the New York Times. She rejects the idea that these features of Western news coverage are the result of any inherent bias.
I begin from a premise that most journalists who are covering conflicts are doing so because they believe that bearing witness to what governments and terror groups do to each other is critically important to the functioning of democracy and of a civil society. These people are trying their very hardest to do the very best that they can. What I think is not true is that there is any kind of systemic bias, like in the structural editorial processes of these newsrooms. I think these newsrooms are trying to report a 360-degree view of an extremely complicated storyline that many of the actors in the storyline don't want to acknowledge the complexity of.
Western news outlets are not monoliths.
Israeli soldiers have been filmed standing over stripped and kneeling detainees in Gaza. But these are medical staff.
Arjumana Karachi and colleagues spent weeks documenting an attack in January that killed more than half of the members of one family.
Many mainstream journalists do try to speak truth to power, and their reporting has, at times, undercut Israel's claims, exposed its war crimes. Journalists at the Times, CNN, and the BBC have told us it can be a struggle to get those stories past editors. Israel's denial of access into Gaza has made the job even more difficult. But it's the larger trends rather than individual examples that shape the effect that media coverage has on audiences. On the Gaza story, they have been quantifiable and point in one direction. A study by the news website The Intercept of post-October 7th coverage by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times found that Israeli deaths were covered on average 16 times more often than when the victims were Palestinian. Words like slaughter and massacre.
That's really crazy to think about because the Israeli deaths occurred in a matter of 48 hours. And then for 12 months, 40 times more Palestinian deaths have occurred in the process. So that 16 times more likely conversation is even more damning when you think about the differences. Like it is crazy. And this once again does not factor in when people talk about the 42,000 or 43,000, 44,000 deaths of Palestinians, that number is directly killed by Israeli rockets, Israeli bombs, or Israeli ammo, okay? That number is very conservative. It is a conservative undercount, okay? That is deliberate. The reason why they do that is they are showing specifically the people that have been killed, that they know have been killed by Israeli rockets or Israeli bombs or Israeli bullets. Okay? The far greater number of casualties as a consequence of not being able to get their fucking medication is significantly larger. That's why the Lancet study estimated that it was most likely going to be 180,000, which was, again, also a conservative estimate as well. Because there are a lot of people who are sick in Gaza. If you don't have access to insulin, you're going to fucking die. That is not counted as a death caused by direct Israeli rocket fire. Okay?
Were used to describe attacks that killed Israelis at least 60 times more frequently than for mass killings of Palestinians, when those terms were almost never used.
The New York Times headlines are filled with volume after volume of story where Palestinians appear to have been killed in a mysterious attack waged by no one. You know, Palestinians are always referred to as dying in the passive tense. It's very clear that there is an agenda from the leadership of the New York Times, and that's been attested to.
Deadly airstrike hits area of Gaza that many have fled to. Who did that? Who did that? How did they do that? How could this have happened?
By whistleblowers in the newsroom who said that it's very clear that they're steering coverage in particular direction and that Palestinians are subjected to a different set of standards than Israelis when talking about their deaths, their sufferings, or their perspectives.
There was a massacre on October 7th. There were atrocities committed. It was barbaric. I think those were appropriate words to use, and the response was intense. It involved a lot of death, destruction, and displacement. But I'm not sure that massacre, barbaric, and atrocity are appropriate terms, certainly not for the full scale of the war.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's just not. Oh, okay, got it. Thanks. No, I personally think when like I see decapitated babies, I assume that is a massacre, you know? But I was wrong. I didn't realize that this was contextually appropriate. It is inappropriate to say that when Israel does a flower massacre, for example, correctly calling it a massacre is actually completely beyond reason. Yeah. Yeah, no, Israelis can never be barbaric. Come on.
There are individual attacks within the war.
Common mistake, happens to all of us. Yeah, no, I'm at the precipice of doing blood libel by saying Israel's even killing children to begin with, despite the fact that they've killed tens of thousands at this point.
That may where some of those words may be appropriate. So it's just, you're talking about two very different things, and they deserve different adjectives.
Yeah.
For Sarah at the BBC, double standards could also be seen in the selection of interviewees and how they were treated. In the days after October 7th, the BBC set up an internal group chat in which producers could vet potential interviewees based on their online footprint. We have obtained messages from that chat, which Sarah says was used disproportionately against defenders of Palestinian rights.
It was overwhelmingly guests on the Palestinian side of things who were being looked into. Palestinians being flagged up for using the word Zionist, which isn't something to flag necessarily. Even the occasional NGO was thrown in, for example, Human Rights Watch.
The craziest, you know what's crazy about this? Dog. Anti-Semitism is far more accepted in these realms of discourse than being anti-Israel. If people wanted to be anti-Semitic, as many are, they openly say it, okay? There is no fucking reason to hide your underlying resentment towards Jewish people in American media, okay? In American social media platforms. There are literally people, I posted this the other day, there are people who in the aftermath of the hurricane, that was just openly being like, well, you know, they do have a weather machine. You know how they are with their weather machine, okay? That person was Marjorie Taylor Greene, by the way, a fucking congressperson. Oh, why did we ban this guy who said you're going to get banned? I wanted to hear what he meant. Okay, yes, they can control the weather. It's ridiculous for anyone to lie and say it can't be done. Or this fucking insane account that was like the mayor of Asheville, North Carolina is Esther E. Manheimer. If you're wondering, yes, she is. Talking about how this Jewish mayor actually caused the atrocity. Actually, anti-Semitic people do not feel the need to shield their anti-Semitic perspectives. Okay, it is insane to be like, there's a massive conspiracy among people who have literally fought against anti-Semitism, people like myself, who are actually secretly using Zionist as a catch-all term to mean Jew. You got motherfucking Holocaust deniers out there, man. You got Holocaust deniers popping off on TikTok. You have Holocaust deniers who are on platforms like Kick, who are popping off on fucking Twitter. It is so ridiculous to be like, oh no, you don't understand. A lot of these guys are just simply trying to shield themselves from being branded anti-Semites. And that's why they use Zionism as a catch-all term. Are there people who do that? Absolutely. Okay. And you can tell they pop off on Twitter when they actually slip. Let the mask slip and very openly say what they truly believe about Jews, right? Having said that, it is ridiculous because most of these institutions care more about people like myself than they do about those actual fucking Nazis, because everyone knows that those guys are Nazis. Everyone knows that they're bad. But for someone like myself, I present a far greater threat to an institution like the ADL. Why? Because I have a shit ton of Jewish watchers, okay? I have a shit ton of young Jews who tune in. I have a shit ton of young Americans who tune in, who see the reality of what Israel is doing and recognize it as being wrong. That is damning to the project of Zionism, significantly more so than someone who's openly been branded an enemy, okay? That's it.
These are organizations that we've really relied on in terms of covering Ukraine and various other conflicts. And now and again, they would check an Israeli guest. But there was no balance in what was going on. Israeli spokespeople who we did have on were given a lot of free rein to say whatever they wanted with very little pushback.
Babies were set on fire. Babies were shot in the head.
Whereas any Palestinian guest was asked to condemn Hamas.
But I want to ask you specifically about Hamas's actions today. Do you support them?
Almost as though condemning Hamas was the sort of price to pay before they could be humanized in our coverage. Many of our own presenters, when faced with an interviewee who was Palestinian or who had lost family in Gaza, there was just such a lack of compassion.
I'm sorry for your own personal loss. I mean, can I just be clear, though? You cannot condone the killing of civilians in Israel, can you?
As a result, a number of producers were really reticent about putting a vulnerable Palestinian guest in front of a BBC presenter.
The mounting double standards have provoked a backlash in the newsrooms of many Western outlets. Journalists at the New York Times and the BBC have resigned publicly, citing their consciences. Others have tried to change things from the inside. BBC staff have repeatedly complained to the network's Director General. One email we obtained, signed in February by more than 20 journalists, warned the corporation's coverage risked aiding and abetting genocide. Staff at the Times leaked details of an internal rebellion over a now notorious report that claimed Hamas weaponized sexual violence on October 7th, an allegation that was exposed as baseless. 70 journalism professors have demanded the Times do an investigation into that report. The Times did conduct an investigation, not into its story, but to find the source of the leak. Numerous journalists we have spoken to describe variations of the same theme: interference from executives and editors, the kind they have never faced on any other story.
There's a divide between the many good journalists within CNN who jump through so many hoops to tell the true story and push back from high-level management demanding that you tone down criticisms of Israel. There was a period of time when we couldn't call airstrikes in Gaza airstrikes unless we had confirmation from the Israelis.
A massive explosion at the largest refugee camp in Gaza. Joining us now is Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht.
It's really depressing because we would not be doing this in any other place. We would not tolerate the need to ask, say, the Russians whether they bombed a hospital in Kiev. So the double standards are really shocking. You try and change managers' minds, you feel like you're making progress, and then something happens, and you feel like you're back at square one. For example, more recently, on the day that 40,000 Palestinian deaths were announced, Mike McCarthy, who's number 3 in the organization, said in the morning editorial call that we need to contextualize and hold Hamas accountable. And that was reflected in the framing from the shows.
The Gaza Health Ministry says more than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed since the October 7th Hamas massacre in Israel that triggered the war.
Multiple journalists, in emails, in meetings, have raised concerns about a lot of the things I've said in this interview. The disparity in the language used, the inconsistency in approach compared to other story areas like Russia and Ukraine, the lack of humanization when it comes to Palestinians, the lack of context about this conflict before the 7th of October. And it hasn't really made a difference because there's just a sort of unwillingness among the executive to accept evidence. For me personally, it meant I could no longer see my future at the BBC.
The lessons learned in 1945, if mankind would remember them, could make the world a better place for all men.
In the wake of the World War II Holocaust, Western governments built a new international legal order, a central pillar of which was the prevention of any future.
So, obviously it's pretty it's pretty obvious what the fuck's going on here. Okay? Smaller Twitter account, but it goes exactly what you were saying about Nazis feeling the need to hide them. I mean, yeah, exactly. Hello, after reviewing the available information, we wanted to let you know Heil Hitler meme hasn't broken our safety policies. Yeah. But it's okay. Elon is pro-Israel. He went to Israel, so like the ADL defended him. After he said Jews actually got a taste of their own medicine for doing unrestricted immigration into the Western world. He went to Israel and he packed it up. You know, he reined it in. It's fucking crazy.
Genocide. Since the early stages of Israel's onslaught in Gaza, experts on genocide have been sounding the alarm. In January, the International Court of Justice described a case accusing Israel of genocide as plausible. 2 months later, a report by the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories found that the threshold for genocide had been met.
We cannot avert our eyes. We must confront genocide. We must prevent it, and we must punish it.
The decision by the United States and its allies to continue supporting Israel diplomatically and militarily makes them complicit.
And may God bless the great alliance between Israel and America forever.
And that has put those news outlets and their journalism to the test, caught between the positions of their own governments and the realities of international law.
This mantra that Israel has a right to defend itself, which has been repeated over and over and over again in Western media.
Israel has a right to defend itself?
Israel has an absolute right to defend itself.
Israel has a right not only to defend itself, but to seek the military destruction of Hamas.
Yes, Israel had a right on October 7th to repel attacks on its territory, but it has no right under international law to make war.
Huh. Interesting. Craig Muckabear, who is infinitely more knowledgeable, alongside Francesca Albanese, who is still currently the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, are both saying exactly what I've been saying since October 7. That's crazy. That's crazy that they are the fucking pallbearers, basically, of international law, recognize the illegality. But hey, the fuck do I know? I'm a terrorism defender and also not a YouTuber or a kick streamer who's like fucking pro-genocide unconditionally. So get your notes not from these people, but from those guys instead.
On the Gaza Strip, a territory that, according to the law, it is occupied for 57 years. So that little rhetorical device of claiming that Israel has a right to defend itself has been used and abused in Western media to provide justifications for wholly unlawful acts.
Israel has a right to defend itself. That was the editorial line that was drilled into us, into all of our coverage. It was really an integral part of the editorial stance. To a guest talking about, Israeli airstrikes killing Palestinians in Gaza, That would be the response from our presenters.
Denying access to food is collective punishment, and that we should all be clear in saying that.
Israel will argue, obviously, that it has a right to defend itself.
People were terrified of using the word genocide in coverage. They still are. You will very rarely see it in any BBC coverage. And if an interviewee says the word genocide,
this is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
We have, that word is, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only.
the presenter will almost always panic.
The Labour Party, of all political parties, which has always had a strong peace contingent within it, is now actually supporting genocide.
OK, if we can maybe just avoid that language, if that's OK.
Having destroyed Gaza's healthcare system, Israel has laid waste to virtually every town and city there. It has slain more journalists in 1 year than were killed in all of World War II. They are among at least 41,000 Palestinians killed. And experts say the real death toll could be several times higher, in excess of 150,000. The response from Israel's primary Western allies has been one of denial about the depths of the horror and their own complicity. As for the Western world's most influential news outlets, they have suppressed the story, amplified the Israeli propaganda that has accompanied it, and downplayed the telltale signs of genocide.
Western mainstream media have invested a lot in trying to draw a curtain across this genocide and disseminating an alternative narrative that makes the crimes happening in Gaza somehow justifiable. And the reason this is so dangerous is because it creates room for Western countries to create a cloak of impunity, and it creates a sense that some countries are above the law, that might makes right, that all of the efforts to build an international order since the Second World War governed by the rule of law may begin to crumble.
It is impossible to overstate the role that the incendiary media coverage played in the events that would unfold after Hamas and its allies broke down the fence that surrounds Gaza.
You're not Hamas. Israel is a democracy, and as a Jewish state, supports and believes in every life mattering.
Israel was able to perform in front of the world a master class in manipulation of the media. And so you had a narrative set that Netanyahu and Biden on their own would not have had the power to drill into the minds of the public, but for the existence of major Western news organizations promoting it for free.
They're not only morally culpable, but there is precedent for the record for criminal culpability as well. I'm not even joking. Like, during the Nuremberg trials, journalists who participated in covering up Nazi atrocities were also deemed criminal. Just saying. I think very carefully. I'm sure the Nazis didn't think that they were going to lose until the very last moment either. You know? And that their actions would never come back to them.
In the future, when we have a museum for this genocide, we will have a special place where we put the pictures of the journalists who allowed it to happen. There will be a wing for the CNN and the BBC and the Times journalists, who were the enablers of the genocide. The Palestinian people will remember them.
CNN said it was a complex story. It's funny to say that, like, oh, this is such a culturally and politically divisive global event. They said that about abortion too. For the record. It was not. It never was. But if you read mainstream reporting on the matter leading up to the Roe v. Wade overturning, I would lose my fucking mind. Probably lost hair follicles because of the both sides have some issues on this divisive topic, arguments. Anyway.